What if Florida's story isn't what you thought it was? Beneath the palm trees, swamps, and sun-kissed coastlines lies a deeply complex heritage encoded in Floridian DNA. A groundbreaking genetic study has peeled back centuries of migration, colonization, and cultural blending, revealing unexpected truths about ancestry, identity, and survival. Florida isn't just a state, it's a living archive of global histories. From ancient Seminole lineages to Caribbean connections and forgotten European ancestries, Florida's genetic makeup tells a story far richer and more intricate than most imagine. This isn't just genealogy. It's a time machine that allows us to see who built Florida, how cultures collided and converged, and why its diversity is more than skin deep. Let's decode the Sunshine State, strand by strand. Why Florida's genetics are unique. Florida occupies a singular position in the genetics of the Americas. With coastlines that have beckoned explorers and immigrants for centuries, it has served as a gateway for waves of human movement. From Spanish colonists to British settlers, enslaved Africans to Cuban exiles, Haitian refugees to Guatemalan migrants, Florida has absorbed more global influences than almost any other state in the U.S. This isn't just historical trivia, it's written into the DNA of its people. Florida stands out as one of the few places where Native American, African, European, and Latin American ancestries intersect and intermingle on a massive scale. Unlike other regions that experience dominant waves of single-group migration, Florida is a convergence zone. This is what makes its genetic makeup so rich, so diverse, and so unique. Its geography played a crucial role. The state's proximity to the Caribbean made it a first landing point for many escaping conflict or seeking opportunity. Its wetlands and forests provided refuge for displaced native communities. Its ports welcomed waves of newcomers whose DNA would eventually merge into Florida's complex genetic fabric. As a result, Florida's people are a microcosm of the Atlantic world, a genetic collage shaped by exploration, displacement, resilience, and rebirth. The groundbreaking study. This extraordinary genetic mapping project was spearheaded by the University of Florida in collaboration with multiple national genomic institutes. Over the span of several years, the team collected DNA samples from more than 25,000 residents, representing every major urban center and many rural communities across the state. Participants provided not only saliva samples, but also oral family histories and ancestral anecdotes. What set this study apart was its methodology. Using fine-scale genomic mapping, researchers identified precise ancestral origins and migration pathways. Rather than broad continental categories, the data zoomed in on ethnic and regional backgrounds: Berber versus Bantu, Taino versus Maya, Sephardic versus Ashkenazi. The result is one of the most detailed state-level genetic portraits ever created in the United States. The study also cross-referenced genetic data with historical records, shipping logs, census data, missionary accounts, and even colonial letters. These layers of information helped fill in the blanks, especially where oral histories conflicted with or contradicted traditional family narratives. What emerged was a dynamic, multidimensional picture of Florida's human past. But beyond data points and genome charts, the study created space for personal discovery. Participants often learned things about themselves they never expected. Some discovered hidden indigenous ancestry. Others found links to long-lost Caribbean or Jewish communities. In this way, the science served not just academia, but also ordinary Floridians, deepening their sense of place and identity. If you have been enjoying so far the interesting facts, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Native American Roots Rediscovered. One of the most profound discoveries of the study was the extent of Native American ancestry present across Florida, even in individuals who had no idea of such roots. In particular, genetic markers linked to the Seminole and Misksuki tribes were found not just in tribal communities, but in urban and suburban families who had never claimed native identity. This is due in part to the hidden histories of southeastern tribes. Centuries of forced displacement, warfare, and cultural suppression led to the loss or dilution of tribal identities. Entire communities were assimilated into broader populations, their indigenous roots fading from public memory but surviving quietly in DNA. Researchers even identified ghost lineages, genetic signatures from now extinct or unrecognized tribes that once lived in the Florida Panhandle and wetlands. The study sheds new light on historical trauma. It shows how indigenous bloodlines persisted through oppression, often protected by intermarriage, secrecy, or rural isolation. Genetic evidence now supports oral histories long dismissed by mainstream historians. For some participants, these findings offered a powerful sense of validation. Today, this rediscovery is more than symbolic. Tribes are using such genetic data to strengthen state claims, promote cultural revitalization, and educate younger generations. It's a reminder that despite centuries of erasure, Native American presence in Florida remains alive in bones, in blood, and in the very stories that shape identity. African ancestry beyond the slave trade. While the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade is well documented in American history, the study brought to light a far more complex picture of African ancestry in Florida. As expected, many Floridians carry West African heritage from regions such as Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. But researchers also uncovered strong genetic links to East and North Africa, including Berber populations from Morocco and Algeria, Somali lineages from the Horn of Africa, and Ethiopian ancestry clusters. These findings challenge simplistic narratives about African American roots. Coastal regions, in particular, showed unexpected diversity. This is partly due to the influence of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. Haitians, Bahamians, and Cubans brought with them not only culture, but also genetic legacies shaped by centuries of complex African migrations and mixtures. In cities like Miami and Fort Lauderdale, the DNA of Afro-Caribbean residents revealed genetic threads spanning from the Congo to Cairo. These patterns reflect historic trade routes, colonial-era displacements, and the movement of freed slaves and Maroons who fled to or were born in the Caribbean before arriving in Florida. In addition, the study highlighted resilience. Despite centuries of enslavement and marginalization, African genetic identity in Florida remains robust and richly diverse. This discovery empowers communities to reclaim fuller narratives of heritage, ones that don't begin or end with enslavement, but instead span empires, revolutions, and continents. These revelations invite a rethinking of African American identity in Florida, not as a singular story of survival, but as a braided history of endurance, movement, and profound cultural fusion, Caribbean and Latin American connections. Walk through Miami's streets, and you hear Spanish, Haitian Creole, and English swirling in the air. This linguistic symphony reflects the region's rich genetic mixture. Floridians of Cuban, Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Central American descent aren't just cultural communities, they are deeply interwoven threads in the state's genetic tapestry. The recent genetics study revealed that many carry a potent legacy of Taino ancestry, especially those from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. These indigenous Caribbean peoples, once thought to have vanished under colonial conquest, live on in the mitochondrial DNA of modern families. In Central Florida and Tampa, communities with roots in Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua display complex mestizo ancestry, combinations of indigenous Mesoamerican, West African, and Spanish lineages. This blend tells stories of conquest, resilience, and migration, of families shaped by centuries of upheaval and movement. Meanwhile, Afro-Caribbean ancestry, especially from Haiti and Jamaica, adds further texture. This includes African roots from multiple regions, including Yoruba, Igbo, and Akan lineages, layered with French, Spanish, and even Middle Eastern influences from the colonial era. Genetic studies even suggest patterns of endogamy and migration that mirror historical records of sugar plantation labor routes and seafaring trade. The result? A Caribbean-Latin fusion that defies simple ethnic categories. Florida's DNA doesn't just reflect its present population, it reveals the story of diasporas colliding, blending, and creating something entirely new. This region stands not as a melting pot, but as a mosaic, every piece distinct, yet contributing to a stunning whole. Hidden European ancestry. While most Floridians expect to find traces of Spanish or British ancestry in their family histories, the DNA evidence uncovers a richer and more surprising European backdrop. Genetic analysis has revealed an unexpected abundance of Basque, Portuguese, Italian, and Sephardic Jewish markers, especially in southern and coastal communities. These ancestries, often hidden or unspoken for generations, are now emerging as integral parts of Florida's genetic identity. In Cuban and Dominican families, traces of Sephardic Jewish ancestry point to a forgotten chapter of history, descendants of conversos, Jews who were forced to convert during the Spanish Inquisition and later migrated to the Americas. These genetic echoes offer silent testimony to centuries of displacement, adaptation, and survival. Further north, in places like Tallahassee and Jacksonville, lineages reveal the presence of Scots-Irish settlers and French Huguenots, early Protestant refugees who arrived seeking religious freedom. Though their cultural identities may have faded, their genetic footprints remain. Some families were surprised to discover links to northern Italy, with genetic markers suggesting early migration via Spanish trade routes or maritime professions. Even small, tight-knit enclaves show unique patterns. For instance, Portuguese lineage appears in fishing communities along the Gulf Coast, likely tied to early explorers or intermarriage with Latin American arrivals. What emerges is a hidden map of Europe, etched into Floridian DNA. These revelations challenge long-held assumptions about racial and ethnic categories, proving that behind every surname lies a multi-layered past, and that Florida's European heritage is anything but monolithic. Jewish heritage in Florida. Jewish communities in Florida reflect centuries of movement, resilience, and reinvention, and their DNA carries the imprint of these journeys. In South Florida, particularly Boca Raton and Miami Beach, Ashkenazi Jewish populations show genetic patterns shaped by historical bottlenecks, moments when small communities expanded rapidly from just a few ancestors. This has left a distinct genetic signature with implications for both heritage and health, including elevated risks for certain inherited conditions. But the story doesn't stop with Ashkenazi Jews. Among Latin Floridians, especially in Cuban, Venezuelan, and Colombian families, researchers have found strong Sephardic Jewish ancestry. Many of these lineages trace back to Spain and Portugal, where Jewish families either fled or converted during the Inquisition. Known as conversos, their descendants often forgot or hid their heritage over time. DNA is now reawakening these identities, connecting modern Floridians to ancestors who practiced Judaism in secret or carried their customs across the ocean. Interfaith and interethnic marriages further complicate and enrich this story. Jewish ancestry appears in families who never identified with Jewish culture, proof of how genes can preserve memory, even when tradition fades. Meanwhile, others who have grown up within Jewish communities discover additional ancestry, Caribbean, indigenous, or African, that expands their understanding of who they are. In essence, Jewish heritage in Florida is both visible and hidden. Through genetics, forgotten migrations and silent legacies are being brought into the light, revealing Florida not just as a home for Jewish life, but as a living archive of global Jewish history. The genetic map of Florida. Zoom out from any individual DNA test, and a bigger picture emerges. Florida as a living genetic map with distinct patterns in every region. In Miami, genetic diversity reaches its peak. Here, Caribbean, Latin American, African, and Jewish ancestries swirl together, reflecting waves of immigration and cultural fusion. You can find families with Haitian mitochondrial DNA, Taino Y chromosome markers, and Ashkenazi bottleneck patterns all within one neighborhood. Travel north to the Panhandle, and the story shifts. The region retains a deep southern U.S. ancestry, tied to English, Scots-Irish, and African-American roots. Yet even here, Native American lineages from the Creek, Choctaw, and displaced southeastern tribes resurface in surprising places, preserved in small towns and family lines. Central Florida, especially Orlando and Lakeland, now shows growing Latino and Southeast Asian genetic influences, thanks to newer waves of migration from Mexico, Venezuela, Vietnam, and the Philippines. This region is rapidly evolving, blending traditional Southern roots with global diversity in real time. Then there's Key West, a microcosm of maritime migration. Bahamian, Cuban, and Spanish ancestry converge here, shaped by trade routes, exile communities, and the island's strategic role in the Gulf. Locals carry genetic signatures linked to sailors, merchants, and freedom seekers who passed through over centuries. Taken together, Florida's genetic map isn't static, it's a dynamic mosaic of arrival, adaptation, and ancestry. Every region has its own genetic flavor, shaped by history and movement, reminding us that place and identity are always in conversation. Genetic time capsules. Florida's DNA is not just a snapshot of the present, it's a layered archive of migrations, upheavals, and turning points. Like geological strata, the genetic record reveals who arrived, when, and how they adapted. Colonial-era lineages, for instance, are still visible today, particularly in coastal communities with Spanish, African, and indigenous ancestry. Some families carry Y chromosome markers tied to early conquistadors or mitochondrial DNA inherited from enslaved women brought from West Africa centuries ago. The Civil War era left its mark too. Genetic traces of mixed-race communities in the Panhandle reflect both forced and voluntary interactions between Black and white populations during Reconstruction. Meanwhile, Cuban exile DNA forms another stratum, visible in people whose families fled Castro's regime in the 1960s, with overlapping roots in Spain, Africa, and Sephardic Jewish lineages. The Great Migration added yet another layer. African-American families moving from Georgia and the Carolinas brought genetic continuity and intermarried with local populations, forming unique micro-communities in places like Jacksonville and Pensacola. More recently, waves of refugees from Latin America, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Haitians have added their threads to the evolving tapestry. Even natural disasters left genetic fingerprints. Hurricanes that displaced entire communities caused population reshuffling that's detectable in genetic clustering today. Economic booms and busts, such as the 1920 state rush or 2008 housing crisis, shaped who moved in, who moved out, and who stayed. Florida's genome, then, isn't just personal, it's historical. A time capsule written in blood and bone, telling the long story of how people survived, connected, and became Floridian. Culture versus genetics in Florida. DNA has a funny way of challenging what we think we know. Across Florida, people taking ancestry tests are discovering lineages they never suspected, Native American roots in families that identify as white, African ancestry in Latino households, and even Jewish markers in families with no known ties to Judaism. These surprises often upend long-held family stories, raising new questions about what truly defines identity. But here's the twist. Genetics may reveal origins, but they don't dictate culture. Someone raised in a Cuban household in Hialeah may have Taino and West African ancestry, yet their lived experience is shaped by Cuban music, Catholic traditions, and Spanish language, not ancient genetics. Similarly, individuals with high percentages of European DNA might strongly identify as African American due to family history, neighborhood, and community life. In Florida, culture often trumps genetic lineage. Identity is forged through food, language, stories, and place, not just chromosomes. What DNA can do, however, is enrich those stories. It gives people a fuller picture of who they are, offering connection to ancestors they may never have known, and validating forgotten or erased lineages. For educators, community leaders, and families alike, this brings a new lens on diversity. It encourages deeper conversations about belonging, recognizing that heritage is complex, fluid, and beautifully messy. Florida's story, then, is not one of either or, but both and. You are who raised you and who shaped you long before that. What this changes. The findings from Florida's genetic study ripple far beyond science. They're reshaping how communities understand themselves. For indigenous populations, particularly descendants of the Seminole, Miccosukee, and other southeastern tribes, genetic validation strengthens state claims, revitalization efforts, and historical recognition. Some families now realize they've inherited native ancestry that was hidden due to assimilation or forced migration, offering a chance to reconnect with cultural roots. For Afro-Caribbean and African American communities, the discovery of diverse African and Middle Eastern origins helps challenge the narrow view of ancestry as solely West African and slave-based. Traces of Berber, Somali, and Ethiopian DNA in Floridians suggest a much broader historical exchange via trade, migration, and cultural blending. Latin American descendants in Florida now have access to a deeper understanding of their complex ancestry. Taino resurgence efforts in Puerto Rican and Dominican communities are gaining scientific support, empowering those reclaiming indigenous identity in the face of historical erasure. In healthcare and policy, the implications are vast. Understanding the diverse genetic backgrounds of Floridians can help design more effective medical treatments, address disparities, and ensure underserved communities are properly represented in health data. But perhaps most importantly, this changes the story we tell about Florida. No longer just a retirement haven or tourist destination, Florida emerges as a global crossroads, its people shaped by conquest and refuge, survival and resistance. Its DNA reminds us that history isn't something that happened. It's something still unfolding inside each of us. What's next? Phase 2 of this groundbreaking research promises to go even deeper. Scientists plan to zoom in on Florida's smaller and more overlooked communities, Haitian enclaves in Little Haiti and Immokalee, Guatemalan and Mayan migrants in Central Florida, and Cuban exile networks that span from Tampa to Miami. These communities often carry unique genetic patterns shaped by historical trauma, isolation, or recent migration, and now they're finally being studied with care and consent. There are also plans to integrate ancient DNA, extracted respectfully from colonial cemeteries, indigenous burial grounds, and long-forgotten family plots. By comparing modern Floridian DNA to these ancient samples, researchers hope to draw direct lines across centuries, illuminating how genetics and culture have endured or changed. Another exciting frontier is regional comparison. Florida's genetic signature will be studied alongside similar data from Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, states with their own histories of colonization, slavery, and immigration. These comparisons could help map out the broader Southern and Gulf Coast genetic landscape, revealing patterns of connection, divergence, and adaptation. Just as important is the social impact. Advocates and educators hope to use this data to push for more inclusive policymaking in healthcare, education, and cultural heritage. The goal isn't just discovery, it's empowerment. Florida's story is still unfolding, and with each genome sequenced, it becomes clearer. The state's future lies in understanding its past, not just through history books, but through the living record written in the genes of its people. For more interesting genetic revelations and histories, subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an update.